Chapter 1, Two Shadows in the Rain. The rain had come on at dusk, the way spring rain always did in that country, soft at first, a whisper across the shingles, and then all at once a hard, steady drumming that turned the yard to mud and the world beyond the window to a gray smear. Caleb Hart sat at the kitchen table with a bridle across his knees and a lamp turned low beside him, working a length of waxed thread through a split in the cheekpiece. His hands moved without his thinking about them. He had mended 1,000 bridles. He would mend 1,000 more, most like, and the doing of it filled the quiet the way a thing does when a man has grown used to quiet and stopped fighting it. The house was clean and orderly, and it was his, and it was empty. 3 years empty now. He kept it the way Sarah had kept it, out of habit and out of something he did not care to name, the crockery stacked just so, the floor swept, her chair still drawn up to the far end of the table where nobody sat. The fire had burned down to a good bed of coals. Outside, the horses shifted in the barn, and the rain came on, and Caleb pulled the thread tight and bit it off with his teeth and thought about nothing at all, which was the only kind of thinking he was good for at that hour. A man got used to it, folks said. They said it the way they said all such things, meaning to be kind, and Caleb let them, because there was no gain in telling them the truth of it, which was that a man did not get used to it. He only got quieter. The quiet grew up around him, the way grass grew up around a fence post left standing in a fallow field, until you could hardly see the post for the grass, until the post half forgot it had ever been driven there for a purpose. He was 34 years old, and he had built the finest small ranch in the valley with his 2 hands, and he had nobody to leave it to, and no reason in the world to look up from a bridle before he was ready. So he did not look up. He worked the thread and listened to the rain, and let the hour carry him toward sleep the way a slow river carries a leaf, without hurry and without destination. Then the pounding started. It was not a knock. A knock had manners to it, a rhythm. This was a fist thrown against the door over and over, frantic and small, and under it a thin, high voice crying out words the rain swallowed before they reached him. Caleb was on his feet before he knew it, the bridle sliding off his knees to the floor. He crossed the room in 4 strides and threw the bolt, and hauled the door open into the wet, roaring dark. 2 children stood on his porch. The bigger one was a girl, and she had thrown herself half in front of the smaller, one arm flung back to hold him behind her, and she was soaked to the bone. Her hair was plastered black to her skull, and her dress hung on her like a rag on a fence post, and her feet were bare in the mud, blue-white and shining with rain. She could not have been more than 13. Behind her, half hidden by her arm, a little boy shook so hard Caleb could see it from the doorway. A small thing of maybe 5 or 6, his eyes huge and fixed and empty of everything but fear. For a long moment nobody moved. The lamplight fell out across them and the rain fell down, and the girl stared up at Caleb with a look he knew. He had seen it on cornered animals, on a mare he'd once pulled out of a bog, that white-ringed readiness to fight or bolt and die doing either. "Lord," Caleb said quietly, "come in out of that." No, the word came fast and hard. The girl's chin came up. She did not move toward the door, and she did not move away from it. She stood her ground on his porch in the pouring rain with her brother behind her, and she looked past Caleb into the warm room and then back at his face. And Caleb understood that she was reading him the way he'd read the mare, deciding whether he was the kind of trouble she could outrun. "All right," he said. He stepped back from the door instead of toward her, and he left it standing wide, and he went and crouched by the hearth and laid 2 split lengths of wood on the coals so the fire caught and leapt and threw a good yellow light and a wave of heat toward the open door. He did not look at them while he did it. "It's warm in here," he said to the fire. "That's all it is, warm and dry, and there's food. You can stand where you are, or you can come to the fire. Nobody's going to lay a hand on you in my house." Behind him the rain hissed. He heard the little boy cough, a wet, rattling, terrible sound for so small a chest, and heard the girl shush him low. "Where's your folks?" the girl said. Her voice had a flat, suspicious edge, older than her years. "They're a woman here." "No woman," Caleb said. "No folks but me. My wife's been gone 3 years. He said it plain and let it sit. "I run this place alone." "Then we ain't stopping." But she had come 1 step over the threshold to say it, dragging the boy with her, into the reach of the fire's heat, and Caleb saw the shiver that ran through her when the warm air touched her. We come off the Benton Road. Our wagon broke an axle. Our pa's back there with it. He sent us on to the nearest light. He'll be along directly." It was a lie, and a poor one. There had been no wagon on the Benton Road. Caleb had ridden it that afternoon, and the mud held no track but his own. There was no Pa coming. The girl knew, he thought, because her eyes cut away when she said it, and her jaw set hard as if daring him to call her on it. He did not call her on it. "Long walk from the Benton Road," was all he said, rising slow so as not to spook them. "Your brother ought to sit down before he falls down. That chair by the fire's the warm one." He moved to the far side of the room, putting distance between himself and them, and he took down the bread crock and the knife and set to cutting thick slices without another word, his back half turned, giving her the room to choose. It was the boy who chose. The child's legs simply gave, folding under him, and the girl caught him before he struck the floor and half carried him the last few feet to the fire, and then she was kneeling on the hearthstone with him gathered against her, glaring up over his head at Caleb like she'd fight the whole world for the right to sit at his fire. Caleb pretended not to see. He poured milk into the iron pan and set it on the trivet over the flame to warm, and he laid the bread on a plate with a crock of honey, and he brought it and set it on the hearth within her reach, and then stepped back, well back, and sat himself down at the table where she could see all of him and all of his hands. "Eat," he said, "both of you." The girl looked at the bread. She looked at him. Then she broke a piece and pushed it into the little boy's hands and folded his fingers around it, and only when he had bitten into it did she take a piece for herself, and Caleb saw the way she ate, fast, hunched one shoulder up, the way a child eats who has learned that food gets taken. The sight of it put a slow, cold anger in his chest that he was careful to keep off his face. He had seen hunger before, on the trail and in hard winters, but there was a particular look to a child who had been kept hungry on purpose, who had learned that a full belly was a thing to be stolen and hidden and gulped before it could be snatched back. And the girl had that look, and so did the boy, and Caleb sat very still at his table and let none of what he felt reach his hands or his voice. He warmed the milk and poured it into 2 cups and brought those too. The boy drank with both small hands wrapped around the cup, and the honey and the warmth and the light seemed to loosen something in him, and the terrible fixed look in his eyes softened by a degree toward mere exhaustion. He coughed again, that wet rattle, and Caleb marked it and said nothing. When they had eaten, he took Sarah's quilt down from the chest against the wall, the wedding quilt, the good one, that he had not so much as touched in 3 years, and he shook it out, and it smelled of cedar and of her, and he laid it over the boy's shoulders where he sat slumped against his sister. The little one's eyes were closing. The girl watched Caleb's hands the whole while ready, but she let him do it. "He's tired," Caleb said. "You're both tired. There's no call to talk tonight. You can sleep here by the fire, and I'll be up the ladder in the loft, and the door'll be bolted from the inside so nobody comes in. You hear me? Nobody comes in." That was when he saw it. The girl had reached to tuck the quilt closer round her brother, and her sleeve fell back from her wrist, and there in the firelight, plain as print, ran a welt across the thin skin, old and half-healed and unmistakable, the kind of mark a strap leaves or a switch. She saw him see it and yanked the sleeve down, and her eyes came up to his, blazing, daring him again. Caleb Hart had a great many questions, and he asked not one of them. He only looked at her a moment, at the mark and the fierceness and the bird-thin wrists of her, and then he looked away, out at the rain, and he said in a voice gone rough, "You sleep as long as you like. Ain't a soul on this earth going to trouble you here." The girl didn't answer, but some of the terrible readiness went out of her shoulders, just a little, just enough, and she settled down onto the hearthstone with her brother in the curve of her arm and the quilt over them both, and she kept her face to the fire and her back to nothing, watching the flames. Caleb banked the coals and turned the lamp down to a thread and had 1 foot on the loft ladder when it came, out of the roaring dark beyond the walls, faint but plain, the wet thudding of a horse ridden hard along the road below the ranch. Hoofbeats, driving through the storm at a pace no honest man kept on a night like this, coming up out of the south and passing and fading away north toward town. He felt the girl go rigid before he turned. When he looked, she was up on one knee, the quilt fallen from her whole small body strung tight as fence wire and her face gone white as bone in the last of the firelight, staring at the black window as if she could see straight through it to whatever rode there. "Etta," the little boy murmured, waking, frightened by her stillness. So that was her name. She pressed him back down without looking at him, without looking away from the window, and her voice when it came was barely a breath. "Hush, Sam," she whispered, "hush now." But her eyes found Caleb's across the dim room, and in them he read the whole of it at last, plainer than any lie, that they had not run from nothing, that something was out there in the dark and the rain, and that it was already looking for them. Chapter 2, Where They Ran From. Morning came gray and rinsed clean, the way it always did after a hard night's rain. Caleb Hart stood at the window with a cup of coffee gone half cold in his hand and watched the light climb over the wet corral rails. He had been awake since before dawn, though he had not moved much. He had wanted to be still. There were 2 children asleep by his fire, and a man like Caleb learned early that startled things ran, and running things did not come back. Etta lay curled on the hearthrug with one arm thrown across her brother, and even asleep she looked braced for something. Her jaw was set. Her free hand had knotted itself in the corner of the quilt, his dead wife's quilt, the double wedding ring pattern Mary had stitched the last winter she was strong enough to hold a needle. Caleb looked at that small fist gripping it and felt something shift low in his chest and settle. Sam woke first. Caleb heard the change in the boy's breathing, the little catch of a cough held back and turned slow so as not to loom. Sam's eyes were open, wide and dark, fixed on him. The boy did not make a sound. He drew himself up against Etta's side by inches, hiding all but those eyes, and stared at Caleb the way a rabbit stares at a hawk's shadow. "Mornin'," Caleb said, easy. He did not step toward them. "There's milk if you want it, fire's still going." Sam said nothing. Of course he said nothing. Etta had told him last night in the small, hard voice of a girl 3 times her age that Sam didn't talk anymore, hadn't for a good while, and that Caleb ought not make anything of it. So Caleb made nothing of it. He set his cup down and pulled on his coat. "Got to see to the stock," he said to the room, to no one. "Barn's the low building yonder. You want to come, you can. You want to stay warm, that's fine too." He did not wait for an answer he knew he would not get. He went out into the wet morning and left the door standing open behind him, which was a thing he did on purpose. A closed door was a thing you could be trapped behind. He wanted them to see he'd left the way out. He was halfway through forking hay to the bay mare when he heard the small suck of bare feet on damp straw. He didn't turn. Sam stood in the barn doorway with the quilt still around his shoulders like a king's robe dragging in the dirt. Etta a step behind him with a hand on the boy's shoulder and murder in her eyes for anyone who moved wrong. Caleb kept forking hay. "Barn cat had kittens back of the oat bin," he said, conversational to the mare. "3 of 'em, one's near feral, but the little gray one'll let you hold him if you're slow." He heard nothing. He forked hay. Then out of the tail of his eye he saw the boy drift one small step, then another, drawn the way all small things are drawn towards smaller things. The mare blew and stamped and Sam froze, but Caleb only murmured to her and kept working, and after a moment the boy came on again. Caleb crouched by the oat bin and came up with a scrap of gray fur that fit in his 2 hands, and it mewed and hooked its needle claws into his thumb, and he held it out low, not toward the boy but just out, into the air between them, an offering with no strings on it. He had learned patience the hard way in the 2 years since Mary. A man alone with stock and silence learned that most living things would come to you if you gave them nothing to fear and never once reached. You waited. You let them close the last of the distance themselves, so it was their doing and not yours, so they kept their pride and their footing. He waited now the same way, on his heels in the straw with his arm gone tired, and did not reach. Sam looked at Etta. Etta's face was a locked door, but she gave one small nod, and the boy crossed the last of the distance and took the kitten against his chest with both arms and bent his whole self around it. And then Sam smiled. It was there and gone, quick as a match struck in wind, but Caleb saw it, and he watched something in Etta's shoulders come down a 1/4 inch that he did not think had come down in years. "There," Caleb said quietly, and got up, and went back to the mare so the boy could have the moment to himself. He fed them properly at the table, eggs and side meat, and biscuits he was passable at, coffee cut with milk for the children. Sam ate with the kitten in his lap and one hand always on it. Etta ate like she'd learned to eat fast and quiet, watching the door, and when she thought he wasn't looking, she palmed a biscuit off Sam's plate onto her own, then off her own back to Sam's, restless with the arithmetic of who had enough. "There's more," Caleb said. "Nobody's counting." She looked at him then, level and long, and he saw her decide something. She set down her fork. "You want to know," she said. "You been not asking so hard I can hear it." "I want to know what you want to tell," Caleb said. "That's all." Etta was quiet a moment. Then she told it plain, the way you'd read a bill of sale, and the flatness of it was worse than any weeping would have been. "Our ma took the fever a year ago come fall. There wasn't but us. Woman named Mrs. Prout came, said she kept a home for children, got no people, the Prout home for wayward children, overpassed the notch, said she'd take us for our keep. Etta's mouth twisted on the word. It ain't a home, it's a workhouse. She rents us out. Farmers, the tannery, a laundry in town. She hires the children out by the day and keeps the coin and writes it all in her ledgers. You get up dark, you work till dark. Doors lock at night. Windows, too. She turned her wrist over without seeming to think about it, showing the mark he'd already seen, the healed-over line of a whip or a strap. You say the wrong thing, that's what you get. Sam stopped talking there. He was 5. He just stopped. Caleb had gone very still. He kept his hands flat on the table where she could see them. She never had no right to us, Etta went on. Ma never signed us over to nobody. There wasn't time. Prout just took us, 'cause who's to say her no? A dead woman's children. She lifted her chin. 3 nights back I broke the window in the wash house with a flat iron, and I carried Sam out over the sill and we walked. Nights mostly, kept off the road. I don't rightly know how far. Then it rained and I saw your light. Her eyes came up to his, hard and daring him. I'd do it again. I'd break every window she's got. So if you're fixing to send word to her, mister, you best do it while I can still run, because I ain't going back, and I ain't letting Sam go back. Not ever, not if I have to. Etta, Caleb said her name low, and it stopped her. He was aware of a slow heat behind his ribs, a clean anger he hadn't felt in years, and he held it still so it wouldn't spill out and frighten the boy. Nobody's sending word to anybody. Everybody says that till there's money in it. I'm not everybody. He turned his own hand's palm up on the table, an old gesture showing them empty. I'll tell you what I know for certain, and you can believe it or not, that's yours to keep. You'll eat at my table long as you need to, both of you. That's a thing I'm saying out loud, so it said. The words came out quieter than he'd meant them, and steadier. He was a man who spent his words carefully, the way he spent everything, and he found he meant this one down to the bone. He had built this house for a family that the fever had taken before it ever filled the rooms. He had gotten used to the quiet of it, or told himself he had. And here in one wet night were 2 children asleep on his hearth under Mary's quilt, and he discovered he could no more hand them back over to a locked door than he could cut off his own hand and mail it somewhere. Etta looked at him for a long moment. She wanted to believe it. He could see her wanting to, and he could see her not letting herself, and he thought that was maybe the saddest thing he'd seen in a year of them. A girl who'd learned that a kind word was just the first part of a trap. Words are cheap, she said finally, but there was no heat in it now, only tiredness. They are, Caleb agreed, so I won't waste more of 'em. Eat your breakfast. He was mending the corral gate near noon, Sam a small, silent shadow trailing him with the kitten, Etta perched on the top rail where she could see the road, when a buggy came up the track from town. Etta was off the rail before it cleared the cottonwoods, one hand snatching for Sam, and Caleb put himself between them and the road without seeming to hurry, the way you step between a horse and a rattler. Easy, he said. I know that rig. It was Miss Della Coburn, the schoolteacher, driving her own gray pony with the notice board of the county fence line survey rolled on the seat beside her. She took it round to the outlying places herself, being neighborly and being nosy in equal and honest measure, as the whole valley knew. She drew up in the yard, and her eyes went, in the space of one breath, from Caleb to the barefoot, boy clutching a kitten to the fierce girl with her arm barred across him. And Caleb watched a schoolteacher's quick mind read the whole account off their faces the way she'd read a slate. She did not exclaim. He gave her credit for that all the rest of his life, that she did not gasp or fuss or ask a single bright, cruel question. She just set the brake and climbed down and said, in a voice pitched gentle and ordinary, Mr. Hart, I've brought the fence notice. And then to the children, lighter still, My, that's a fine kitten. Gray's my favorite. Does he have a name yet? Sam ducked behind Etta, but he did not run, and Etta, though she kept her body between the woman and her brother, said grudgingly, Not yet. Best kind, said Miss Coburn, as if that were a sensible thing. No sense rushing a name. Caleb walked out to take the rolled notice from her, and under cover of it she said to him low, so the children couldn't catch it, Caleb, there's a man come into town yesterday, stranger. Good coat, soft hands, buys the storekeeper's ear with silver. Her warm eyes had gone flat and serious. He's asking after 2 children, a girl and a boy. Says he'll pay for word of where they've got to. Caleb's hands did not tighten on the notice, though it cost him something. Out at the rail, Sam had crept a half-step back into the sunlight, the kitten tucked under his chin, watching the schoolteacher with those wide, dark eyes. Etta had not stopped watching the road. "He got a name?" Caleb asked. "Not that he's giving, just money and a real polite way about him." Della glanced past Caleb at the girl on the rail and back. "Whatever this is, you'll not do it alone. I want you to know that before you go telling me you can." Caleb looked at the two children in his yard, and at the road they'd come stumbling down out of the rain, and at the empty valley beyond it that was not empty anymore, that had a soft-handed man in a good coat somewhere in it with silver in his pocket and their names in his mouth. "No," he said, "I don't expect I will." Chapter 3, The Man in the Good Coat. The rain had gone by morning, but the town of Cold Fork wore its aftermath like a bruise, mud to the ankles on Front Street, water dripping off every eave, the sky a flat pewter that promised more. Della Coburn tied her mare to the rail outside Aldous Pratt's Mercantile and stamped the wet from her boots, a list of schoolhouse needs folded in her glove. Chalk, a tin of lamp oil, a bolt of muslin for the little ones who came to class in rags. Ordinary errands. She had not yet crossed the threshold when she heard the voice inside, and something in it stopped her the way a wrong note stops a hymn. It was a pleasant voice. That was the trouble with it. Smooth as poured cream, unhurried, the voice of a man who had never once in his life had to raise it to be obeyed. "A girl of 13 or thereabouts," the voice was saying. "Dark hair, sharp in the face, traveling with a small boy, perhaps 5 or 6. The boy is sickly. They would have come through recent on foot in poor condition." A pause, and the soft chime of coins set on the counter. "I'd count it a kindness to know of anyone who's seen them, and I'm not a man who forgets a kindness." Della stepped inside slow, the bell above the door giving its small, betraying ring. Aldous Pratt stood behind his counter looking like a man holding a snake he'd mistaken for a rope, and the stranger turned. He was tall and he was clean, which by itself set him apart in that mud-caked town. A good coat, charcoal wool, cut close, brushed free of the road. A gray silk cravat. His face was handsome in an arranged sort of way, every feature where it ought to be and none of them warm. His eyes found Della and moved over her once, quick and thorough, the way a buyer looks at stock, and then he smiled and lifted his hat. "Ma'am, Mr. Vane was just asking after some travelers," Pratt said, too quick, the way an honest man tells a truth he wishes he could swallow back. "Silas Vane," the stranger inclined his head. "I've the misfortune to be a recovery agent, ma'am, not a trade that wins friends, but somebody must do the sorry work of bringing the lost home." He drew a folded paper from inside the good coat and let it fall open just enough that she caught the shape of it, dense script, a red seal, the fat authority of a legal hand. "2 children have run off from their lawful guardian, wards of the Prout home, down in Calder County. Frightened, no doubt, and full of stories, children will say anything to a stranger's kindness." He tucked the paper away. "I only mean to see them safe." Della had buried a husband and taught 8 years of frightened children their letters, and both of those things had taught her to keep her face still. She kept it still now. "That's a sorrowful business," she said, "but I fear I'm no help to you, sir. I keep the school out past the Hart place, and I see near everyone comes through. I've seen no children but the ones I've had since Christmas." She let her eyes go vague, a spinster schoolmarm's mild uselessness. "Though children do wander so, have you tried the church? Reverend Ames keeps a Christian eye on strays." Something flickered behind Vane's smile, not doubt exactly. A man like that did not doubt. But a small recalibration, a coin turned to see the other face of it. "I'll do that, ma'am, thank you." "Della," Pratt began, and she cut him a look so bright and empty that he shut his mouth. She made her purchases with maddening ordinariness, chalk and oil and muslin, chatting of the weather while her heart went like a hammer, and she did not let herself hurry until she was through the door and around the corner of the building and at her mare's flank. Then she hurried. She had the reins loose and her foot in the stirrup before Pratt's bell had stopped ringing, and she put the mare up the muddy road out of town at a pace no lady rode, mud flinging from the hooves, the schoolhouse and its chalk forgotten behind her. Caleb was in the near paddock when she came up the track, mending the same stretch of fence he'd been fighting all week, and he had the look of a man who read weather in people the way he read it in the sky. He saw her face across the yard and set down his hammer. "He's here," Della said before she was fully down. "In town, asking after them by name, by their look anyhow. A recovery agent. Vane, he calls himself. He has papers." She caught her breath. "He has good papers, Caleb, a seal and all. He says the matron's their lawful guardian and the children are runaway wards and that anyone keeping them is," she stopped. "Is stealing," Caleb finished quietly. That's the shape of it. Behind him, at the barn's dark mouth, Della saw the girl. Etta stood half in shadow with the boy's hand caught in hers, and she had heard, Della saw that she had heard, because the color had gone out of her face, and her body had gone into that stillness Della had seen in rabbits, the stillness that is only the moment before the run. Get inside, Caleb told them, not sharp, but a voice with the ground under it. Both of you, bar the back. Etta, you don't run. You hear me? Not yet. Running's what he's counting on. He waited until the girl gave one small, furious nod and drew her brother back into the house. Then he turned to Della. Tell me all of it, every word he said. She told him. He listened the way he did everything, without waste, and when she was done, he was already walking toward the barn for his saddle. You're going to town, Della said. It was not a question. A man like that, he's taken my measure by now. Everybody's. Pratt, the church, the saloon. Caleb heaved the saddle up onto the bay. He knows there's a widower out past the school with new mouths to feed. Won't take him long. Rather I go to him standing up than have him come to me. He cinched the girth. I want to see his face when he lays it all out. A man shows you more than he means to, first time you make him say it out loud. Then I'm coming. You're staying. He looked at her, and there was no hardness in it, only the plain arithmetic of the thing. Somebody stands between him and that door who isn't me, and there's a schoolteacher out here alone with 2 stolen children. You're the only soul in this county he'd believe knows the law. He comes back here, you talk. You don't have to win. Just hold the ground till I'm back on it. Della found she could not argue with that. She found, too, that she did not want him to ride off, and that the not wanting had a warmth in it she had no business feeling and set aside like a hot dish. Then go and come back, she said, and mind your mouth, Caleb Hart. He's cleverer than you. Most everyone is, he almost smiled. That's never stopped me being stubborner. He found Vane on the mercantile porch, as though the man had known to wait there, leaning against a post with the ease of somebody who owned all the time in the world, watching the rain-swollen street. Caleb tied up and came onto the boards, and Vane took him in with one glance and knew him. Caleb could see it, the way one dog knows another across a fence. Mr. Hart, I'd guess, Vane said. Word is you're a man keeps to himself. I respect that. I'm the same. You're the man asking after children. I'm the man charged with recovering 2 runaway wards, yes. Vane straightened off the post, unhurried, and the good coat fell just so. Perhaps you've seen them, a girl and a boy, half-wild by now and full of grief they don't understand. His voice softened into something meant to sound like sorrow. Their mother passed. The Prout home took them in, fed them, clothed them when there wasn't another soul on this earth would. Legal guardianship all in order. He drew the folded paper again, and this time he held it out, the seal turned up, close enough to read. The matron is beside herself. She only wants her children home. Caleb did not take the paper. He let it hang there in the wet air between them and looked instead at the man's face, at the eyes that stayed cold above the warm mouth. Say I had, Caleb said. Say 2 such children turned up cold and starved on a porch. Say a man could count the girl's ribs and read the mark on her wrist that a rope leaves. What lawful guardian sends her wards off like that, Mr. Vane, that she needs a hired man with a seal to fetch them back? The mouth kept its shape. The eyes changed, a small thing, a hardening, the mask fitting closer. Children bruise, Vane said. Children lie, and a rope on the wrist can mean she was tied to keep her from wandering off a well. You've a tender heart, Mr. Hart. I'd hate to see it make you a thief in the eyes of the county. He folded the paper away. That paper says those children belong to Mrs. Prout. A man who keeps them from her keeps stolen goods. That's not my opinion. That's the law with a seal on it. Then show it to a judge. Caleb said it plainly, without heat, and it landed harder for that. Not to me. I'm no judge, and neither are you, and neither's your matron. You've got a paper, you take it to Marshal Boone in the circuit court, and you swear to it under oath in front of a man who can weigh it, and if it holds, it holds. Till then it's a piece of paper in a fine coat. He set his hat. Show a judge, not me. For a long moment Vane looked at him, and Caleb watched the man do his sums. The same cold arithmetic Vane did on everything, weighing what this stubborn rancher would cost him against what he'd be paid. Then the smile came back, wider, and worse for being genuine, because it was the smile of a man who had just decided to enjoy his work. Do you know, Vane said pleasantly, I believe I like you, Mr. Hart. It's a rare thing meeting a man who means it. He touched his hat brim. Show a judge, I'll do exactly that. And when the paper holds because it will hold, I'll be back out your road with the marshal beside me, and you'll hand those children over on your own porch, lawful and quiet, and shake my hand for teaching you the value of the courts." He stepped down into the mud. "Give my regards to the schoolteacher. She lies very prettily." Caleb rode home the long way past the ridge, and it was there he saw the two of them, a pair of horses tied in the aspens above the county road, and two men he half knew from the saloon, hard, idle men who worked when the pay was easy, sitting their saddles and watching the track that led to his ranch, watching the roads. So Vane had bought eyes already and meant to keep them. He did not stop. He rode down to the schoolhouse where Della waited on the step with the door of the future half open behind her, and he told her about the men on the ridge, and she told him what she knew of guardianship law and county records and the letters a person could write to the seat of things. And between the two of them, his land and his stubbornness, her books and her iron, a thing took shape in the failing light that was not quite a plan yet, but was, at least, a wall beginning. Neither of them named the other warmth in it. There was no time. But it was there, quiet under the talk, the way a hearth is there under a cold room, waiting. Up on the ridge, unseen, Etta lay flat in the wet grass where she had crept to see for herself, and looked down at the two watchers on the road, and understood with a sick and final certainty that they could not simply run again. The whole country was fenced now. There was only the standing. She went back down to the house to stand. Chapter 4, Teaching the Boy to Speak. Morning came soft over the Hart place, the storm 3 days gone, and the pasture green as it ever got that time of year. Caleb Hart stood at the corral rail with a coil of rope in his hands and watched the girl try, for the 4th time, to get her boot into the stirrup without the mare stepping sideways on her. "She's doing that on purpose," Etta said, glaring up at the horse. "She is," Caleb agreed. "She wants to see if you'll quit." Etta set her jaw the way she did when a thing became a matter of pride, and Caleb had learned in 3 short days that pride was near the whole of what held the girl together. She gathered the reins shorter, put her weight down slow, and this time when the mare shifted, Etta stepped with her instead of against her and swung up onto the blanket-covered back like she'd been born there. She looked down at him, startled at her own success, and for one unguarded breath the fierceness dropped clean off her face, and she was only what she was at 13 years old and pleased with herself in the sunshine. "There now," Caleb said quietly. "You've got her." "I've got her," Etta tested the words. Then, because she could not help it, "What if she runs?" "Then you sit deep and you talk to her low, and she'll remember you're up there and she's not alone in it." He handed the lead line up. "Horses are like children. They spook when they think nobody's holding on. You hold on, they settle." She gave him a long, sideways look at that, the kind that measured a man for a lie, but she didn't find one. So she walked the mare in a slow circle around the corral and said nothing, and that silence was the most peaceable thing that had passed between them yet. Near the barn, Sam sat cross-legged in the dirt with the barn kitten in his lap, and Miss Della Coburn sat on an upturned bucket beside him with a slate balanced on her knee. She had come out that morning under the flag of a basket of eggs and a bolt of flannel, left over from the schoolroom, which was a plain enough excuse that nobody troubled to argue it. In truth, she had come for the boy, and Caleb had seen it the moment she stepped down from her buggy, and her eyes went straight to the small shape hiding behind the water trough. "This one," Della was saying, and she drew a letter on the slate with a nub of chalk slow so he could watch the shape of it grow. "This is an S. It makes a sound like the wind coming under the door. SSSS. It's the first letter of your own name, Sam. Your name starts with a whisper." Sam did not answer. He almost never answered. But he watched her hand, and his own small fingers moved a little in the kitten's fur, tracing something Caleb couldn't see. Della did not push. Caleb had noticed that about her right off, she had the patience of a woman who had waited on frightened things before and knew that hurrying was the surest way to lose them. She drew the letter again. Then she put the chalk in the boy's hand and folded her own hand light around his and let him feel the shape without making him own it. "You don't have to speak it," she said. "You only have to know it's yours." The kitten, tired of being an anchor, climbed out of Sam's lap and pounced sideways at a bit of straw. It missed entirely, tumbled, and sat up looking so offended by its own clumsiness that Sam made a sound. It was small. It was barely a sound at all. But it was a laugh, a rusty, startled hiccup of a laugh, the sound of a thing that had forgotten it knew how. And both Caleb and Della went very still, the way you would if a wild bird had lit on your wrist and you didn't dare breathe for fear of the flutter of it leaving. Sam clapped a hand over his own mouth. His eyes flew up, frightened, checking their faces for the punishment that a laugh had always earned somewhere behind him. "That's the best sound I've heard all week," Caleb said, easy, not looking straight at him, giving the boy his back to hide behind. "That cat's got no dignity at all." Sam's hand came down slow. He looked at the kitten, which was now attacking its own tail, and the corner of his mouth pulled again, helpless, and this time he let it come. "He needs a name," Della said. "The cat, a creature, can't be expected to behave without a name. Sam, what should we call him?" The boy looked at her. He looked at the kitten. His lips parted, closed, parted again, and Caleb found he had stopped mending the rope in his hands entirely. "Biscuit," Sam whispered. It was the first word Caleb had heard him say in 3 days under his roof. It came out cracked and thin, hardly more than a breath, but it was a whole word, chosen and given, and Della's eyes went bright and she blinked hard and kept her voice perfectly steady. "Biscuit," she said, as though it were the wisest name ever spoken. "Because he's brown and he's warm and everybody wants one. That's exactly right." "He's the color of biscuits," Sam offered, and that was a whole sentence, and it undid something in the morning that could not be done back up. Caleb looked away toward the mountains a moment. On account of a man had a right to his own eyes, and when he looked back, Etta had stopped the mare at the rail and was staring at her brother like she'd seen the dead sit up. She said nothing, but she pressed her lips together and turned the horse and rode another circle, faster now, her back very straight, and Caleb understood she was crying where none of them could see it and would sooner die than let them. They ate at noon on the porch, the 4 of them, cold chicken and biscuits, real ones, which occasioned a grave conversation between Sam and the kitten about whether it was a form of relation, and it was the first meal Caleb could remember at his table that had noise in it. Not much, but some, and the sum of it filled corners of the house that had stood empty a long 2 years. Afterward, Della gathered the plates, and Sam trailed her inside carrying exactly 1 spoon with enormous care, and that left Caleb and Etta on the step with the valley spread out below them. Etta watched her brother's small back disappear through the door. Then she said, without looking at Caleb, in the flat voice she used for the things that frightened her most, "What happens when you get tired of us?" Caleb didn't answer right off. He'd learned that too, that a quick answer to Etta was the same as a lie to Etta, that she trusted a thing better if a man had to reach for it. "When my wife died," he said finally, "this place got so quiet I could hear the clock in the next room. I used to eat standing up so I wouldn't have to sit at the table and look at the other chair." He turned the coffee cup slow in his hands. "I'm not tired of the noise, Etta. I was tired before you came, 2 years tired. You didn't bring the burden into this house. You lifted one out." She was quiet. A hawk went over high, riding the warm air off the rock. "People say things," she said. "At the home, folks came through sometimes. Ladies with nice bonnets. They'd say, 'Oh, you poor lambs,' and they'd give us a sweet and pat our heads and get back in their buggies and drive off, and we never saw them again. Words are cheap. Everybody's got words." "They are," Caleb said, "so I won't waste any more on it." He set the cup down on the boards between them. "You want to know what I'll do instead of talk? Watch. Every morning that boy wakes up here and eats here and sleeps here. Count them. When you've counted enough of them that you believe it, you tell me, and I'll count the rest with you." Etta looked at him then, full on, the measuring look, the one that had learned in a hard place to find the crack in every kindness. She looked a long time. She didn't find the crack. Caleb watched her not find it and watched it trouble her more than a lie would have. "All right," she said at last, low, "I'm counting." "Good," Caleb said, "so am I." He had ridden to town the day before and told the truth to 2 men. Otis Barrow at the mercantile had listened over the counter with his thumbs in his apron and his mouth pulling down, and when Caleb finished, the storekeeper had wiped the same clean spot on the counter 3 times and said, "Lo, I believe you, Caleb. I've known you 15 years and you don't tell tales." Then he glanced at the window, where a man in a good gray coat had been standing not an hour before, and added quieter, "But that fella's got papers, papers with a seal on 'em." A man can believe you and still not want to stand in front of a seal. You understand me? Caleb understood him. He'd got the same from his nearest neighbor, Hollies, who'd looked at his boots and said his piece about not wanting trouble on his own land with his own young ones to think of. And Caleb hadn't pushed him, because a man protecting his children was a man Caleb couldn't rightly fault, even when it left him standing alone. Some believed, some hedged, and the paper sat between all of it like a stone in a stream, turning everything around itself. He told none of this to Etta. The rider came in the last gold of the afternoon. Caleb saw the dust first, then the shape of a horse coming up the ranch road at a walk, not a hurry, which was its own kind of message. And then the low sun caught the small, dull star pin to the man's vest, and Caleb knew before he could read the face beneath the hat brim that the law had come to his door. Behind him he heard the porch door and Della's voice, sharp and quiet. Etta. Caleb turned. The girl stood frozen at the corner of the house, Sam's hand caught in hers, and her eyes were fixed on that star with the whole of her old terror rushed back into them, every counted morning wiped away in an instant by a piece of tin. Etta, Caleb said, even and low, the voice he used on the mare. Take Sam to the barn, into the loft behind the hay like we talked. Don't come out till I call you by name. You hear me? By your name. For one heartbeat she didn't move, and he thought she might bolt straight across the open pasture with the boy in tow, out into the country where the roughs watched the roads. He hasn't come to take anybody, Caleb said. Not today. Today he's only come to talk to me, and I'm going to let him. Go on now. Count on me. Something in those 2 words reached her. She swallowed, gripped her brother's hand, and pulled him quick and quiet around the back of the house toward the barn, and Caleb heard the small drum of their feet fade, and then the barn's shadow swallow it. Della came and stood in the doorway with her hands folded hard in front of her apron, and did not go inside, and Caleb was glad of her there. The rider came into the yard and drew up and sat his horse a moment, an older man, gray at the temples, with a lined and tired and honest sort of face, and eyes that had seen enough to be slow about believing any man wholesale, one side or the other. Caleb Hart, he said. It wasn't a question. Marshal Boone, Caleb answered. The marshal reached inside his coat and drew out a folded paper, and he did not unfold it, only held it there across the horn of his saddle where they both could see the shape of it. I expect you know why I've ridden out, Boone said, and the weariness in his voice was almost kindly, which was somehow worse than if it hadn't been. A complaint's been sworn against you, Caleb, harboring 2 wards run off from a lawful guardian. It's got a name on it and a seal, and much as I'd rather be most any place than your yard this evening, that makes it my business now. Behind the house, in the barn's deep shadow, Caleb heard nothing at all, which meant the girl was holding her breath and holding the boy, and waiting to hear what one man's word was worth against a seal. He stepped down off his porch into the yard, and stood in the last of the light and chose his words. Chapter 5, The Marshal's Question. Marshal Boone rode into the yard the way old men rode who had learned that hurry never bought a thing but grief. He came at a walk, his gray mare picking her way through the puddles the last of the rain had left, and he stopped a good 10 feet short of the porch as though the distance were a courtesy he owed. He did not get down at once. He sat there in the pale morning light and looked at the house, and at the smoke standing up straight from the chimney, and at Caleb Hart come out onto the boards with his hands loose at his sides. Behind Caleb, the door had shut. He had heard it shut, and he had heard the quick, soft scuffle of feet that meant Etta had already taken Sam and gone for the back of the house, and past that, if she judged it, for the barn. He did not turn to look. He kept his eyes on the marshal and let the door be shut. Caleb, Boone said. Marshal, you know why I'm here. I can guess. Caleb came down 1 step and stopped. You'll take coffee before you say it, though. It's made. The old man's mouth moved under his gray mustache, not quite a smile. You're a stubborn man even in your manners. He swung down at last, slow, one hand pressed to the small of his back and looped the mare's rein over the rail. I'll take the coffee. Won't change what I've come to say. Didn't figure it would. They sat on the porch, the 2 of them, in the ladder-back chairs Caleb's wife had painted blue a long time ago, and that the weather had worn back mostly to wood. Caleb brought the coffee out and gave the marshal the cup with the good handle. For a while neither of them said anything past the drinking. A meadowlark went off somewhere out in the wet grass once, and then thought better of it. There's a man in town, Boone said finally. I've met him. So I hear, Mr. Vane. The marshal turned the cup in his hands. He's filed a complaint with me. Formal. Says you're harboring 2 children that are lawful wards of a Mrs. Prout up at the home in the county over. Says the girl and the boy ran off from their guardian and you've took them in knowing it and won't give them up. He looked sideways at Caleb. That true, the last part? Every word of it. Boone sighed. It seemed to come up from his boots. I wish you hadn't said it that plain. You asked me plain. I did. The old man set the cup down on the boards between his feet and drew a folded packet of papers from inside his coat. He did not hand them over right away. He held them a moment as though they weighed on him. I've read these, Caleb. I've read them careful because I don't like the smell of that vein any better than you do, and I hoped I'd find a hole in them. I didn't find one. They look right. There's a guardianship writ with a seal on it. There's the matron named as the appointed keeper of these children after their mother passed. There's a filing that says they absconded. It is all in order, and it is all in a lawyer's hand, and it does not have a thing in it I can lay a finger on and call false. He set the papers on the chair arm. On paper, those children belong to that woman, and you've got them. Caleb looked out at the yard. The puddles were bright as coins. Papers can be made, he said. They can, I know it, and you know it. But knowing a thing and proving it are two different countries, and I have to live in the second one. Boone rubbed his jaw. I've worn this star 31 years. I've seen men do murder and walk because there wasn't proof, and I've seen an innocent man near hang because there was too much of the wrong kind. The law is a poor blunt tool, but it's the only one I've got that isn't just my own opinion, and my own opinion isn't worth a thing with a badge pinned over it. So you'll take them back to her? I didn't say that. The old man's voice sharpened just a little the first heat he'd shown. Don't put words in me, Caleb. I've buried a lot of things under this star, but never yet my own judgment, and I'm not starting on your porch. He leaned forward. I said the papers are good. I did not say the woman is, and there's the whole of it. A guardianship stands on the notion that the guardian's fit. If she isn't fit, if she's what you say she is, then the paper's worth no more than the lie under it. But that's not for me to rule on. That's for a judge. Caleb was quiet a moment. When he spoke, it was slow, laying each word down like a fence post set to last. Then let it go to a judge. I'll not hand those children over to any man on the strength of a seal. Not to you, not to Vane, not to the county. You bring me a judge, and you let that woman stand up in front of him and prove she's fit to keep a dog, let alone 2 children she starved, and I'll abide whatever he says. That's the law too, isn't it? A hearing, proof. Not just a paper waved on a road. Boone studied him. You've thought about this. I've done nothing else since that man rode into town. There's a hearing to be had, the marshal allowed. The circuit judge, Judge Aldous, he comes through on his rounds, due in this district inside of 2 weeks. I can set the matter over till he's here. Won't be hard. A guardianship dispute's exactly the kind of thing he rules on. He picked the papers back up and squared them against his knee. But hear me, Caleb, because this part matters. If I set it over, you are bound by me and by the star. Those children stay right here. You don't spirit them off. You don't run them north. You don't wake up one morning and find your good sense has took the 3 of you to Oregon. They stay, and you keep them, and you bring them to that hearing when it's called. You give me your word on that, or I take them today and lodge them somewhere neutral till the judge comes, and I don't think either of us wants me doing that. You have my word. Just like that. My word's the one thing I've got that a paper can't touch, Caleb said. You'll not find me spending it cheap, and you'll not find me breaking it. They stay. They come to the hearing. I'll stand up beside them when it's called. The old man looked at him a long moment, and something in his face eased, not much, but some. I believe you, he said. God help me, in a business where I've quit believing most men, I believe you. He got to his feet with a grunt and set the empty cup on the rail. It was then that the door opened. Caleb turned. Etta stood in it. She had not gone to the barn after all, or she had gone and come back. Her boots were dark with barn mud to the ankle, and there was straw caught in her hair. She had Sam's hand gripped in hers, but she had put the boy behind the door frame out of the marshal's sight, and she came out onto the porch alone, chin up, the way she did everything, braced for a blow she meant to take standing. You're the law, she said to Boone. It was not a question. I am Marshal Boone. He touched his hat brim grave the way he'd have done to a grown woman. And you'd be Etta. You come to take us back. No, Boone said. I came to find out whether I had to. I don't yet. There's to be a hearing. Etta's jaw worked. Caleb saw the war in her, the animal part that wanted only to bolt for the tree line, and the other part, the fierce grown part that had carried a 6-year-old 3 nights across open country, that knew running had a bottom to it and they'd near reached it. She won her own war. She stepped forward instead of back, and then, without a word, she pushed her sleeve up past the elbow and turned her thin arm over into the light. Boone looked. He did not flinch, but his stillness changed, went heavier. There was the whip mark on her wrist that Caleb already knew, healed to a shine, and above it others, older, a whole quiet history written up her forearm in scar. She turned it slow so he could not mistake it for one bad day. "That's her keeping," Etta said. Her voice did not shake, which was somehow worse. "That's her fitness. She's got a strap with a ring worked into the end and she calls it correction. She rents us out, did you know that? To farms, to the mill, whoever'll pay her by the day, and she keeps the coin. And if you come back short of your work, she's got the strap for that, too. I've a brother in there, had 6 years old, coughs like to turn himself inside out, and she'd have rented him same as me the day he was big enough to lift a bucket. That's what your paper wants to send us back to. You look at that seal and then you look at this, and you tell me which one's the truth." For a moment no one spoke. The meadowlark tried again, far off, and gave it up. Marshal Boone let his breath out slow. "Child," he said, and it was gentler than any word Caleb had heard out of him, "I don't doubt one thing you've told me, not one." He tapped the folded papers against his palm. "But I have to tell you a hard thing, and I'd rather tell it to your face than behind your back. A judge looks at scars, and a judge feels for you, same as I do. But scars don't say who put them there. They don't sign a name. That woman'll stand up and say you fell or you came to her that way or somebody else did it, and she'll have her paper with its seal, and you'll have your arm and your word. And a girl's word in that room against a sealed writ." He stopped. He seemed to hate the thing he was saying. "It's not enough. I'm sorry. It ought to be. It isn't. We'll need more than what's on your skin. We'll need proof against her the way there's proof against you." Etta pulled her sleeve down. "There's never proof against them," she said low. "That's how they get to be them." "Sometimes there's not," Boone agreed. "And sometimes a body goes and finds it." He looked past her to Caleb. "You've got till Aldous rides in, 2 weeks near enough. If there's a truth to be dug up about that woman, dig it. Bring me something a judge can hold. I'll not pretend the odds are with you, but I'll hear it fair and I'll say so to Aldous, and that's more than Vane thinks I'll do." He set his hat straight. 2 weeks. They stay till then. You've given me your word and I'll hold you to it." "You'll not need to," Caleb said. The marshal went down the steps and untied the mare and climbed up slow into the saddle. He sat a moment looking down at the two of them, the tall, quiet man and the fierce, thin girl close at his side, and whatever he thought he kept it. He touched his hat again and turned the mare and rode out at the same unhurried walk he'd come in on. They watched him to the bend in the road, and it was there, where the fence gave out and the willows leaned over the track, that Caleb saw the second horse. It stood back in the shade of the trees, and the man on it had been sitting still enough that the marshal, riding, had gone right past without a look. But Caleb, standing, saw the shape of the good coat and the pale oval of the face beneath the hat, turned up toward the house. Vane. He had watched the whole of it from the road, the marshal come and the marshal go, and no children handed over, and Caleb, straining, thought he saw the man smile. Vane lifted 2 fingers to his hat brim, unhurried, courteous as ever, a greeting across the distance. Then he reined his horse around and walked it off after the marshal, in no hurry at all, like a man who had all the time he needed, and had just been told exactly how much of it he had. Beside Caleb, Etta had gone still as a held breath. She had seen him too. "He's not going to wait for any judge," she said. Caleb put his hand on her thin shoulder, and this time she did not shrug it off. "No," he said quietly. "I don't expect he is." Chapter 6, Building the Case. The morning after the marshal set his deadline, Caleb Hart rose before the sun and saddled 2 horses instead of 1. He stood a moment in the gray barn with his hand on the second horse's neck, thinking about how a man's life could turn on a 2-week span of days, and then he led them both out into the yard where Della Coburn was already waiting with her satchel of paper and pencils. "You didn't have to come," he said. "I did," she answered and swung up without help. "You know cattle and fences, Mr. Hart. I know courthouses. A case is built with both." They rode to the churchyard first, where the little Baptist meeting house sat on a rise above the creek. It took them the better part of an hour of walking the crooked rows before Etta, who had insisted on coming, stopped cold in front of a plain wooden marker no bigger than a shingle. Somebody had scratched a name into it with a nail, uneven and childish. "That's her hand," Etta said. Her voice had gone flat the way it did when she was holding herself together with both fists. "I did that. They wouldn't buy a stone. The preacher gave us the wood." Caleb crouched and read it, Mary Colton. Beneath the name a single year, he looked at it a long while. "She's real," he said quietly. "The county keeps a record when the ground's church ground. A death gets written down whether they buy a stone or not." He glanced up at Della. That's a paper, isn't it? That's a paper, Della was already writing. A death record with a date on it. If Mrs. Prout ever claims these children were lawfully surrendered, she surrendered by a woman on a particular day. Dates can be checked against each other. Dates don't lie the way people do. She looked at Etta gentler. Your mother's leaving us a hand to play even now. Etta said nothing, but she stood by the little marker a moment longer than she needed to before she turned away. They went to the county clerk's office in town after that, and Caleb waited on the walk with the horses while Della went in alone, because a schoolteacher asking after records raised no eyebrows and a rancher doing it might. She came out with 2 pages copied in her own neat hand, and a look in her eye that Caleb had learned to read as a small victory. There's no surrender on file, she said, keeping her voice low as they walked the horses down the street. None. If a mother gives her children over to an institution lawful and proper, it's recorded, signed, witnessed, filed. There's nothing here for Etta and Sam, which means either Mrs. Prout never had a legal claim at all, or she'll make one, Caleb finished, between now and the judge. Or she'll make one, Della's mouth thinned. We had best have the truth built high enough that a forged page can't top it. That was the shape of their days after. It was not the sort of fight Caleb knew, no fence to mend with his hands, no beast to wrestle to the ground, and more than once he felt the helpless heat of a man swinging at fog. But Della had a patience for it he came to admire near to reverence. She wrote letters. She wrote to the county seat, to a schoolmistress 2 towns over who had known Mary Colton before the fever, to the circuit court's own clerk asking after the standing of the Prout home. She talked to people the way he mended tack, one small, careful knot at a time. It was Della who found the cook, and it was chance that led her to it. A word dropped by a washerwoman, a name half-remembered, a thread pulled patiently until it gave. Her name was Hetty Shaw, and she had worked the kitchen at the Prout home for the better part of 9 years before her knees gave out, and she was turned loose to live with her sister on the edge of town. Della found her hanging wash in a bare little yard, and it took 3 visits and a good deal of coffee before the woman would say more than the weather. Caleb came on the 3rd visit, at Della's asking, because she said the woman needed to see that there was a man in it who'd stand between her and Mrs. Prout. He stood in the doorway with his hat in his hands, and let the old woman look her fill of him. You're the one took the Colton young ones, Hetty said finally. It wasn't a question. I am. That girl. She still got that mouth on her. She has. Something moved in the old woman's seamed face, near a smile and near a grief. Good, she said. Good. That mouth's the only thing kept the boy alive in that place. She lowered herself into a chair and looked at her ruined hands. I seen things in that house, mister. I fed children that got rented out to farms by the week like they was mules and come back with their hands split open, and the money went in a book and none of it went to them. I kept my head down 9 years because I needed the wage, and I'm ashamed of it. I'm an old woman now, and I got no wage to lose. Della knelt by the chair. Would you say that to a judge, just what you saw? Just the truth. The fear that crossed the woman's face was an ugly, living thing, and Caleb understood it. She had lived under Mrs. Prout's roof. She knew better than any of them what that woman was under the church clothes. If you keep her off me, Hetty whispered, if you promise me she can't touch me for it. The law keeps you off her, Della said. That's what the law is for, and this man will stand in the door of the courthouse the whole day if it comes to that, won't you? I will, Caleb said. He meant it the way he meant everything he said, which was entire. The old woman looked at him a long moment and then nodded once like a woman stepping off a ledge. Then I'll say it. God forgive me for not saying it years since. They rode home in the last of the light with a witness, and it should have felt like triumph. It felt to Caleb like a man carrying water in his 2-cupped hands, precious and leaking, and a long way yet to go. That night after Sam had been coaxed to sleep, and Etta had gone up to the loft where she still slept with one ear open, Caleb and Della sat on the porch and did not speak for a while. The rain had gone off days ago, and the sky had cleared to a hard scatter of stars, and the cold spring air smelled of turned earth and coming green. You've done more for these children in a week than the world did for them in years, he said at last. So have you. I gave them a roof, you're giving them a chance. He turned his hat in his hands. I don't have your gift for it, the paper, the words. You have a different gift. Della drew her shawl closer. In the lamplight from the window her face was warm and near and unguarded in a way that made his chest ache. You gave a frightened girl your word and never once made her sorry for believing it. Do you know how rare that is? A man who says a thing and it's simply true?" She looked out at the dark yard. "My husband, God rest him, was a good man, but his words came cheap and easy and blew off like chaff. Yours cost you something." A body can feel the difference. A child certainly can. The quiet between them changed. He was aware of the small distance from his hand to hers on the bench, and of how easily it might be closed, and of how much he wanted to close it. She was aware of it too. He could see that she was. "Della," he said, and stopped. "I know," she said softly. "I can't." The words came hard. "There's nothing I can offer you that isn't wrapped up in a fight that might be lost in 2 weeks. If it goes wrong, if that judge sends those children back, I'll go over that county line after them, and I might not come back a free man. I won't tie you to that. It wouldn't be right, and it wouldn't be fair to you." She was silent a moment. Then she laid her hand over his, not taking it, only resting there, warm and certain, and left it just long enough that he understood it was a promise and not a retreat. "When they're safe," she said, and rose and gathered her things, and did not finish the sentence because she did not need to. He sat on the porch a long while after her wagon had gone, feeling the shape of the unfinished words like a warmth he had no right to yet. It was Etta who came down the ladder in the dark. She sat on the top step below him, a slight shape wrapped in the dead wife's quilt she had claimed for her own, and for a time she said nothing. He had learned not to hurry her. "I heard some of it," she said finally. "About the cook, about the papers." A pause. "You're really going to do it, not just say it, do it." "I am." She pulled the quilt tighter. "There's a thing I never told you," she said, and her voice had gone very small, smaller than he had ever heard it, the voice of the child under the fierce girl. "Because if I told it and you sold me out, she'd know it was me told," and then she stopped. "I have to trust you first. That's the part that's hard, trusting first. You don't have to say it if you're not ready." "I'm ready." She looked up at him, and her eyes were bright and afraid and finally wholly decided. "There's a book. Mrs. Prout keeps a ledger, a real one, not the church one she shows people. It's got every child she ever rented out and to who and the money. She keeps it locked in her desk in the office. I've seen it. Sam's name is in it. My name is in it." Her breath shook. "That book could hang her. That's why she wants us back so bad, mister. It ain't the money we cost. It's that I've seen the book, and I can read. And a girl who can read is dangerous to a woman like that." Caleb sat very still, feeling the whole shape of the thing turn over in the dark and come clear. Not 2 children fleeing a hard house. A witness fleeing the evidence. Everything Mrs. Prout had done, spelled out in her own hand, and a 13-year-old girl who could point at the page. "Etta," he said carefully, "you're certain of this?" "I'd swear it on my mother's wood cross." She lifted her chin. "Get the book and the cook and my say-so all in front of that judge and she's finished. She'll hang or worse, and every kid in that house walks free." Caleb looked out at the dark land where his cattle slept, and the road ran pale toward town, and everything they had to fear. For the first time since the marshal had ridden into his yard, he felt not the helpless heat of swinging at fog, but the clean, cold certainty of a man who has finally seen the ground he means to fight on. "Then that's what we'll do," he said. "The book, the cook, and your word, we build it that high and no forged page tops it." Etta let out a breath that was half a sob and leaned, just slightly, just for a moment, against his knee. The first time she had ever let herself touch him. The first time she had ever let herself lean. He rested his hand light on her hair and did not move, afraid to break it. And above them the stars wheeled slow and clean over the ranch. And for 1 full hour of that cold spring night, it seemed to Caleb Hart that they might truly win. He did not know yet how much the woman in the good church clothes was already moving against them in the dark. He only knew, that night, that hope had come to sit on his porch, and he let it stay. Chapter 7, The Midpoint Blow. The rain had passed in the night, and the morning came up hard and clear, the kind of spring light that made a man believe the worst was behind him. Caleb Hart knew better than to trust it. He stood at the corral rail with his coffee going cold in his hand and watched at a walk Sam's little dun mare in a slow circle, the boy's hands buried in the mane, and he thought that if he could keep just this, the 2 of them upright in the sun, breathing easy, he'd count it a life well spent. Della's buggy came up the ranch road before he'd finished the thought, and he knew from the way she drove, quick and tight-trained, that the clear morning had lied. She didn't wait for him to hand her down. She stepped out of the buggy with her skirts in one fist and her jaw set. "Mrs. Alcott's gone," she said. Caleb set the coffee on the rail. "Gone where?" Nobody knows. Her room over the laundry is emptied out. Bed stripped. The little tin box she kept her wages in, all of it. Della's voice was steady, but her eyes were bright and furious. I went to fetch her this morning to go over what she'd say to the judge, same as we planned. The woman downstairs said a gentleman came for her 2 nights back. Paid her rent through the month and told her she'd be traveling. A gentleman. Silk manners, Della said. A good coat. Vane, Caleb felt the name settle in his chest like a stone dropped down a well. Mrs. Alcott had been their strongest witness, a workhouse cook for 11 years, a frightened, decent woman who had seen the ledgers with her own eyes and had, after 3 visits and a good deal of gentling from Della, agreed to say so to a circuit judge. She had known what the renting of children looked like from the kitchen side of the door. She had known the names in the book. Without her, they had a girl's word and a rancher's temper, and a rancher's temper had never yet moved a court. How much do you figure he gave her? Caleb said. Enough that she'd leave the only town she's known 30 years and not look back. Della shook her head. You can't blame her over much. She's a widow with a grown daughter poorly. Vane found the soft place and pressed it. That's his trade. He doesn't fight people. He finds their softest fear and buys it. She looked toward the children at the rail. Ours isn't for sale. That's the one thing he can't figure how to price. She didn't leave word, Caleb said. It wasn't a question. She left this. Della held out a scrap of paper folded small. Caleb opened it. The hand was cramped and unsteady, a woman writing fast and afraid. I am sorry. I have my own to think of. Do not look for me. He folded it again and put it in his shirt pocket, because he didn't trust his hands not to crush it. Behind him, he heard the mare stop, and he turned to find Etta at the rail, close enough to have heard, her face gone to that flat, wary stillness he'd seen the first night on the porch. 6 weeks of table and fire had softened it. It was hard again now. She's not coming, Etta said. No, Caleb said. He would not lie to her. He had promised himself that much. Etta looked out past him at nothing. I told you, she said low. I told you it doesn't matter what's true. They've got the coin. Coin buys the paper and the people and the judge and everybody. You don't win against that. You just find out slower. We're not done, Caleb said. You keep saying that. Because it's so. He came off the rail and stood square in front of her so she'd have to look at him. Etta. I don't make a claim I can't hold. I told you that on the 2nd day, and I'll tell you every day you need it. We are not done. She held his eyes a long moment. Then Sam coughed on the mare's back, a small, thin sound, and she turned to him the way she always did, the whole of her swinging toward the boy like a compass to north, and the conversation was over. They went to town because there was no help in staying home. Della had a thought about the county records still, and Caleb wanted his own eyes on whatever was breaking. He got both wants filled inside of an hour, and neither the way he'd hoped. The mercantile porch was full of people, which was the first wrong thing. A weekday morning ought to have been quiet. Instead, there was a knot of folk gathered close around a woman in gray, and the woman was weeping. She was handsome in the way a hawk is handsome. Clean lines, nothing wasted gray hair drawn back under a good bonnet. Hands folded at her waist in black lace gloves. She had a handkerchief pressed to one eye, and she was talking in a low, carrying, broken voice about her poor lost children, about the fever that took their sainted mother, about the wicked man who had stolen 2 grieving orphans from the only home and Christian care they'd ever known. That's her, Etta breathed. She had gone the color of the mercantile whitewash. That's the matron, that's Mrs. Prout. Caleb put his hand flat between the girl's shoulder blades, not to push, only so she'd know where he was. He felt her trembling straight through his palm. Mrs. Prout saw them. Her weeping did not stop, but something behind it sharpened and settled, a card player seeing a good hand come up. There, she said, and lifted a gloved finger toward the children with the handkerchief still in it, so the gesture looked like grief. There is my Etta. And is that little Samuel behind the wagon? Oh, they've been frightened half to death. Look at them, look how thin. Ma'am, Caleb said, and though he didn't raise his voice, the whole porch went quiet under it. You'll not point at my children. Your children? Mrs. Prout lowered the handkerchief and let them all see her face, wet and dignified and wounded. Sir, I don't know you. I know only that I buried these babies' mother with my own hands and took her orphans in when the county would have left them to the road, and I have crossed 40 miles of bad country to bring them home before this scandal ruins 2 young lives entire. She turned to the crowd, to the storekeeper, to the marshal who Caleb only now saw standing at the edge of it with his hat in his hands. I have their mother's own letter. Her own hand, gentlemen, giving them into my keeping. What has this man got? A temper and a locked gate. There was a murmur, and Caleb heard the tide in it. 2 weeks ago, these same people had listened to him at this same porch, and half of them had believed. Now here was a weeping gray-haired woman with a dead mother's letter, and grief was an easier story than a workhouse. He watched the neighbor Tam Ferris, who'd shaken his hand and called Vane's papers a swindle, drop his eyes to his boots and go quiet. Marshal Boone stepped in before it curdled worse. "All right," he said. "All right, this is no business for a porch. Mrs. Prout, you'll come to my office and lay your paper out proper. Hart, you'll keep your peace." He looked older than his years in that moment, a fair man being handed something heavy he hadn't asked for. It was in the shuffle of moving, in the press of bodies coming off the porch steps, that Mrs. Prout came near enough to Etta to be heard by no one else. Caleb was a half-step off, turned to shield Sam from the crowd, and he did not hear it. Only Etta did. The matron leaned in as though to embrace the girl, all tenderness for the watching town, and under it, in a voice like a door closing in a cold house, she said, "Run all you like, girl. I'll have the boy back in the drying room by summer's end, and you'll watch him earn his keep same as before, and there won't be any rancher's supper to run to. I always get my property home, every one of you, every time." Then she straightened, and her face was streaming and gentle again, and she said aloud, "Oh, my dear, don't cry," though Etta had not made a sound. Etta had gone rigid and white and silent, her hands closed to fists at her sides, and the town saw a matron's love and a runaway's stubborn heart, and they did not see the thing that had just been done in front of them. Caleb saw the after of it. He saw Etta's face when the woman stepped away, and he knew a blow had landed even if he'd not caught the shape of it. He got the children into the wagon fast, his arm around Sam, Della up beside him, and he did not draw a full breath until the mercantile was small behind them. "What did she say to you?" he asked low, when the town was gone from sight. Etta looked at the road going by. For a while he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she said in a voice scraped clean of everything that she always gets us back. "That it doesn't matter what we do," she swallowed. She said it before in the drying room. She was right the first time. "She was not right," Della said, fierce and quick. "Etta, look at me. A woman who has to whisper her power to a child in a crowd hasn't got much of it. That's not strength talking. That's fear dressed up mean." Etta didn't argue. That was the worst of it. The girl who'd argued with everything, who'd braced in a doorway in the rain and sized up a grown man twice her weight. She just looked at the road and said nothing, as if arguing were a thing she'd finally decided to stop spending on. Marshal Boone rode out to the ranch near sundown, alone, his horse walking. He didn't dismount at first. He sat looking at the house with its lamp just lit in the window, and Caleb came out and stood on the step and waited. "I've seen the letter," Boone said at last. "Then you know it's a forgery." "I know it's a letter signed with a woman's name dated the winter before last, giving those children into Eugenia Prout's guardianship." Boone's jaw worked. "It reads clean, Hart, witnessed and all. I don't like the woman, I'll say that to you, and I'd not say it to her. There's something in her puts my teeth on edge. But I've got a weeping guardian with a signed surrender and a circuit judge riding in Thursday, and I've got you with a girl's word and a witness who's blown out of the county like smoke. Mrs. Alcott was bought off. You know that, too. Knowing and proving are different animals, and you've been a lawman long enough as a citizen to tell them apart." Boone finally swung down, slow, and stood holding his reins. He was not a cruel man. That was almost the hardest part. Caleb could have used a cruel man to be angry at. "I came out to tell you plain because you've earned plain. If that letter goes in front of the judge Thursday and nothing lands on the table to break it, the children go back. That's the law, and I'll be the one has to carry it out. God help me, and I will do it because that's the office. Do you hear what I'm telling you?" "I hear it." "Thursday," Boone said. "You've got till Thursday to turn up something true enough to burn that paper." 3 days. He looked past Caleb to the window where 2 small shapes had come to stand, watching, and something in the old man's face cracked and then closed over. He put his hat on. "I'm sorry. That's a poor thing to say, and it's all I've got." He rode off into the dusk, and Caleb stood on the step where the children had come to him out of the rain 6 weeks before, and he understood that the ground they'd fought for had gone out from under them all in a single day. The witness gone, the woman here, the paper made, the town turned, 3 days and a forged letter between Sam and the drying room. Behind him, he heard Della come to the door and felt the children's eyes on his back, waiting to see what a man did when his word ran up against a wall he could not climb. He did not turn around yet. He watched the dark come down over the road and made himself a promise, silent, that he'd not have called out loud in front of them. Not Thursday, not any day, whatever it cost. Chapter 8, The Longest Night. The rain came back after dark, the way it had the night they first arrived, and Caleb Hart had learned to hate the sound of it. He sat up long after the children were down, cleaning a rifle he had already cleaned once, because his hands needed something to do that his mind could not touch. Sam slept on the pallet by the fire, wrapped in the quilt that had been Mary's, one small fist curled against his mouth. Etta lay near him, not sleeping. Caleb could tell by her breathing that she was only pretending, the way she pretended most things, keeping one ear open on the world. Della had stayed late. She sat across the table with a shawl around her shoulders and a stack of letters she'd carried out from town, sorting them by lamplight because she said her hands got restless too. There was a comfort in her being there that Caleb did not let himself name. Not yet, not until the boy and the girl were safe. He had told her that on the porch 2 nights ago, and he had meant it. "You should ride home before this gets worse," he said. "I should," she agreed, and did not move. He almost smiled. Then the dog started barking out in the black, and the smile died before it was born. It was not the bark the dog gave for a possum or a coyote. It was the deep, frightened one, the one that meant men. Caleb was on his feet before he decided to be, the rifle coming up in his hands. "Etta," he said low, "up get Sam." She was already moving. She had been half awake her whole life. A thing like this did not surprise a girl raised the way she'd been raised. She had Sam by the shoulder, shaking him gentle, whispering his name when the door came apart. They did not knock. That was the thing Caleb would remember after, that men who claimed the law never once knocked. The bar splintered and the door swung wide on the storm, and there were 3 of them, water sheeting off their hats, and in front, dry under an oilcloth someone had held over him like he was a church-going lady, stood Mr. Vane. "Mr. Hart," Vane's voice was mild as milk, "don't reach for that." Caleb reached for it anyway. He got the barrel up. One of the roughs, a broad man Caleb had seen loitering on the road for a week, swung something short and heavy, a length of wagon tongue or a bar of iron, and it took Caleb across the wrist and then the side of the head, and the world went white and then red and then sideways. He heard the rifle hit the boards. He heard Della cry out his name. He was down. He got a hand under himself. The floor was moving like the deck of a boat. "Quiet now," Vane was saying, somewhere above the roaring in Caleb's ears. "We'll have no fuss. I've paper for the boy. I've paper for the girl. This is lawful recovery of wards, and every man in this room a witness that I asked politely first." "You broke his door and split his skull," Della said. Her voice was shaking, but it did not break. "There's your politeness. There's your law." "Ma'am," Vane touched his hat to her, and that mildness was the most frightening thing in the room. "You'll want to step back." Caleb heard Etta then. He would hear it the rest of his life. She had put herself in front of Sam in the corner by the hearth, her arms thrown out wide like a fence made of a 13-year-old girl, and she was screaming, not in fear, in fury, the sound of something feral defending its own. "You don't touch him. You don't put a hand on him. I'll kill you, I swear before God I'll kill you." "The boy first," Vane said to his men, unhurried. It was fast after that, and ugly, and Caleb saw it in broken pieces because he was on his knees trying to stand and the room would not hold still. The second rough, younger, quick, went for the corner. Etta fought him. She fought like the war it was to her, teeth and nails, and she caught Sam's wrist and would not let go even when the man lifted the boy clean off the floor. So that for one terrible moment the child hung between them, screaming that thin, high scream, and Sam was calling a word over and over, and the word was Caleb's name. Caleb got up. He does not remember crossing the room. Della told him after that he moved faster hurt than most men move whole. He got a fist into the young rough's face and heard something give, and the man dropped Sam, and for half a breath Caleb had the boy's shirt in his hand, the worn cotton, the knobs of his little spine, warm and real and his. Then the iron bar came down again, across his back this time, and his legs quit under him. He fell with his hand still open, and the broad man scooped Sam up under one arm like a sack of feed and was gone out the broken door into the rain, and Vane went after, unhurried even now, and the young one with the ruined face went last, dragging Etta 3 steps by the hair before she twisted loose and fell. "He's held for the guardian," Vane said from the dark of the doorway, water and lamplight behind him. He drew a folded document from inside his coat and let it fall to the wet boards, almost gentle, the way a man drops a coin for a beggar. "There's your copy. Signed, sealed, a matron's lawful claim on her wards. Read it at your leisure. Bring your judge, bring your marshal, bring the whole county if it pleases you." He settled his hat. "It changes nothing. The boy goes where the paper says, and the paper says home." Then hoofbeats and the groan of a wagon and the sucking sound of wheels finding the mud road. And under it, growing smaller, a child crying out a name that no one was coming to answer. Then only the rain. Caleb got as far as the porch. He remembered that, hauling himself up the doorframe hand over hand, out into the wet, hollering Sam's name into the storm until the storm swallowed it. The lantern light did not reach the road. There was nothing out there but black water and the smell of turned earth and far off fading the wagon. His legs went. He sat down hard on the top step and could not make them lift him again. Della was there. She had her hands on his head, on the cut over his ear that was bleeding down into his collar, saying his name, saying, "Be still, be still." And he could not be still. He was trying to tell her they had to go now, and the words came out wrong and slurred and useless. Etta stood in the doorway. She was not crying. That was the thing that gutted him worse than the boy being gone. She stood with her hair torn loose and a welt rising on her cheekbone and her eyes gone flat and dead, and she looked at the empty quilt on the floor by the fire, and she said, in a voice with nothing left in it, "I let go." Della started. "I had his wrist, I had it." She held up her own hand and looked at it like it belonged to a stranger. "I said I'd never let go of him. Since we were little I said it, and I let go." "You didn't let go." Caleb's voice came back to him then, thick but his own. He got a hand on the rail and turned so he could see her. "You hear me, girl? You didn't let go. A grown man 3 times your weight pulled him out of your hands. That's not letting go. That's being 13. "It's the same to Sam," she said, and finally the flatness cracked, and what was under it was so much worse. "He's out there in the dark thinking I gave him up, thinking I let them. He's thinking nobody's coming." Her breath hitched one hard time, and she mastered it. "He doesn't cry loud. You noticed that? 6 years old and he learned not to cry loud because loud got you noticed at the home and noticed got you worse. So he's out there right now crying quiet, and there's not a soul near him who'd care if he cried loud enough to wake the dead." Caleb reached out and took her wrist, the one with the whip scar he'd seen the first night, the one she'd hidden from him for a week, and he held it, and he did not let it go. "Somebody's coming," he said. Della had him by the shoulders, trying to steer him inside out of the rain, and he would not go. He looked at the empty place on the floor where the quilt lay flung back, still holding the shape of a small, sleeping boy, and something in Caleb's heart that had been bending for 6 years quietly stopped bending. "Get the horses," he said. "Caleb, you can't hardly stand." "Then I'll ride sitting down." He pulled himself up the rail to his feet, swaying, and set his jaw against the swimming in his head and looked at her, and Della saw whatever it was in his face and stopped arguing. "That boy came to my door in the rain and I told him no one takes him. I said the words. A man's word isn't worth spit if it holds in fair weather and folds the first hard night." He wiped blood from his eye with the back of his hand. 2 days till the judge means nothing. In 2 days, Vane hands him over the county line and he's smoke. Prout has him back behind a locked door and no letter or judge in the world gets him out again. It's tonight. It has to be tonight. He crossed to where the rifle lay in the doorway and picked it up, and for a moment he stood over the fallen quilt. He bent, it cost him, and Della started forward, but he waved her off, and he gathered the quilt up in both hands, Mary's quilt, and he held it against his chest, and he said something so low that only Etta, closest, heard it. "I'll bring him home," he said to the empty cloth. "If it takes everything I've got, I'll bring him home." Then he folded it once, careful, and set it on the chair like a thing kept for someone expected back. "North Road," Etta said suddenly. She had wiped her face and her eyes had gone sharp again, the fear burned down to something harder and more useful. "He came from town, he'll go back the way that don't pass through it." The county line road runs by the old Stageway station, Miller's Crossing. There's a barn there, a place to change teams and lay up out of weather. He can't drive a wagon all night through this mud with a screaming child. He'll hole up there and wait for Prout or wait for morning one. She looked at Caleb. "I ran that country, I know it. He has to stop and that's where he'll stop." "Then that's where we go," Caleb said. "You go," Della said. "All 3 of us." She had already gathered her shawl, was pinning her hair back with quick, furious hands, a schoolteacher arming for war. Don't you say a word about it not being fit for a woman. That boy learned his letters on my slate." And then she stopped. Her hand went still in her hair. She turned to the table where her letters lay scattered from the fight, water-spotted now. And among them was one she had carried out from town that evening and never opened, set aside in the ordinary quiet before the world caught fire. She picked it up. Caleb watched her go pale, then watched something come into her face that he had not seen in days, not since before the cook recanted, not since Prout smiled her tearful smile at the whole believing town. "Caleb," her voice had changed. "This came on the evening coach. It's from the county seat, from the clerk of the court I wrote 3 weeks ago." Her thumb was already under the seal, tearing. "I never opened it. In all this, I set it down, and I never." "What is it?" he said. "Della, what is it?" She read. The lamp shook in the draft from the broken door. Outside, the rain came down, and somewhere north of them a wagon carried a crying boy toward a locked room, and Della Coburn lifted her eyes from the page, and for the first time that whole black night, there was something in them that looked like a way out. "It changes everything," she said. Chapter 9, No One Takes You Now. The way station sat gray and low against the paling sky, a squat sodden timber place where the county road bent toward the ford. Caleb Hart came down on it out of the north with the dark still clinging to the hollows, and he saw the wagon before anything else, canted in the yard with one wheel sunk in the mud, a horse still in the traces, blowing hard and ridden near to ruin. He drew rein at the edge of the light and let his breath and the horse's breath settle. His side ached where the boards had caught him 2 nights back, a low burning pull under the bandage Della had wound too tight. He did not think about the ache. He thought about the boy. Behind him, a good way back, were Etta on the sorrel and Della on the gray, and somewhere behind them, God willing, the marshal. But that was all behind him. What was in front of him was a door, 2 roughs, and a man in a good coat who meant to sell a 6-year-old boy back into a locked room. Caleb stepped down. He slid the rifle from the scabbard, worked the lever once, and let the sound carry across the still yard the way a man clears his throat before he speaks. The door opened. One of the roughs, the big one, Harmon, who'd watched the ranch road for a week, filled the frame with a lamp in his fist. He saw Caleb in the mud with the long gun leveled, and his face did a slow, ugly thing. "You," Harmon said. "Me," Caleb agreed. "Bring the boy out." "Now you listen." "I've done my listening." Caleb's voice was not loud. It never had to be. It came up out of him level and cold as well water, and it stopped the big man in the doorway. 2 weeks of it. Bring the boy out, Harmon, and you walk to your horse, and I don't put a hole in you. That's the whole of what I've got to say to you. From inside came Vane's voice, smooth even now, even at dawn in a filthy way station with everything gone sideways. "Let him in, Harmon. Mr. Hart and I are old friends. We only ever talk." The lamp drew back. Caleb came up the 2 rotten steps and through the door with the rifle up, and the low room swam into being around him, a plank table, a dead fire, the second rough half risen from a bench with his hand drifting toward his belt, and Vane by the far wall, hatless, his good coat streaked with mud, and at his knee, wrapped in a horse blanket that stank of the wagon, small and white and silent, Sam. The boy's eyes found Caleb and did not leave him. He did not cry out. He had learned in the Prout home not to cry out. But something crossed his thin face that Caleb would remember all his life, a thing like a candle catching, and his cracked lips moved around a word with no sound in it. "Sam," Caleb said, "I'm here." "Charming," said Vane. He had a pistol. It lay on the table under his flat hand, and he had not lifted it, and that was the whole of the dance now, whether he would lift it. "You've had a hard ride, Mr. Hart. You're bleeding through your shirt, and all for a piece of another man's property." "He's a child. He's a ward of a lawful guardian, which the law will tell you is a species of the same thing." Vane tipped his head, his cold eyes weighing, always weighing, the way a man counts coin in the dark by feel. "You won't fire that. You're not the sort. I've made a study of sorts, Mr. Hart. It's my trade, and you're the sort that stands in a doorway with a gun and a conscience, and the conscience is the heavier by a good stone. Put it down." "Let's talk terms." "The second one moves his hand another inch," Caleb said, not looking away from Vane, "and I'll have shot him before you finish being clever." The rough went still. "Sam, come here to me. Don't look at anybody but me." The boy did not move. His eyes went, terrified, to Vane, then to Caleb, then to Vane, the whole schooling of his short life, that you did not move until the keeper said. And Caleb understood, cold all through, that fear was the wall Prout had built, and it stood in this room as surely as sod and timber, and no rifle could knock it down. So he did the only thing he had. He softened everything in him and said, gentle as he'd say it by his own fire, "Sam, it's all right. You're allowed, I promise you, son. You're allowed to come to me now." And Sam came. He came up out of the blanket and stumbled across the plank floor on legs gone stiff with cold, and Caleb dropped to one knee, and the rifle never wavered off Vane even as his free arm came around the boy and gathered him in, small and shaking and real. He could feel the boy's heart going like a bird's, the cough building in the narrow chest, and the boy fighting it down out of old habit. "I've got you," Caleb murmured into his hair. "No one's taking you anywhere." How touching, Vane's hand moved on the table, and how brief. The pistol came up an inch. Caleb turned the rifle full on him, and the room drew its breath. And the door banged wide on the gray morning, and Marshal Boone stood in it with a scattergun, and the weariness of 40 years of other men's trouble on his face. "Nobody," Boone said, "does one blessed thing." For a long moment the way station held its breath, Boone in the doorway, the light coming up hard and gold behind him. Vane's pale eyes flicking from Marshal to Caleb to door, doing their cold arithmetic and finding at last, the sum did not come out in his favor. His hand eased off the pistol. He sat back. He smiled, because a man like Vane always keeps a smile the way a gambler keeps a last coin, but it did not reach any place near his eyes. Behind Boone came Etta, through the door and past the marshal before anyone could stop her, and she went down on her knees and pulled Sam half out of Caleb's arms into her own, and made a sound Caleb had never heard from her, that fierce contained girl, a raw broken sound with the boy's name in it. And behind Etta came Della, breathless, her hair down out of its pins and her hem black with riding, holding in her two hands a letter with a broken county seal. "Marshal," Della's voice shook and steadied, like a flame in wind that will not go out. "This came to the ranch last evening. It went unopened and until we were on the road. It's from the clerk of the county court. You need to read it before this man says another word." Boone did not lower the scattergun. "Read it me." She read it, the clerk's flat courthouse words that were the most beautiful words Caleb had ever heard. The surrender letter Mrs. Prout had produced over the dead mother's name, the letter that had turned the whole town against them, bore a date in September, and the county's own death register set down the mother's death in the July previous. 2 months in her grave and signing papers still. It was not a girl's word against a matron's tears anymore. It was a date, and a date does not weep or plead or wear a good coat. And there was more, and Della read that too, that the Prout Home for Wayward Children was, by order of the circuit, under formal inquiry for the hiring out of children in its keeping for private profit, that its ledgers were called for, that all removals of children in its name were suspended pending the court. "Suspended," Boone said slowly, "pending the court." He looked at Vane. "Which means your paper is no paper. You've been carting a stolen child across my county for a woman the court's already got its hand on. That's not recovery. In this territory we call that kidnapping, and we hang for it when the mood's on us." The smile left Vane's face at last. Caleb watched it go, watched the cold man see the coin turn to a noose in his hand, and do the last piece of arithmetic there was to do. "I was hired," Vane said, and his voice had lost its silk, gone flat and quick, "in good faith to recover wards I was given to understand were lawfully held. If those papers are forged, Marshal, then I'm a wronged party the same as any, and I'll say so gladly, and say who drew them and who paid me in front of any judge you like." He spread his hands. "I'm a man of business. I've no interest whatever in hanging for Ada Prout." "No," Boone said, "I don't expect you have." He tipped his head at the two roughs. "You boys are done working for wages. Sit down and be quiet, and maybe you keep your necks." And they sat, the fight gone out of them, ordinary hired men who had run out of a reason to be brave. Then it was over as quietly as that. No shot fired. No blood but what had already dried on Caleb's shirt. Just the marshal's steady bulk and a letter doing what no rifle could. Caleb walked Sam and Etta out onto the way station porch, out of that close foul room into the clean cold morning with the sun just breaking over the ridge and the whole wet world glittering. He sat down on the boards with his back to the post and drew them both in against him, one under each arm, the boy shaking, the girl gone stiff and strange with everything she was holding down. "Etta," he said. "Don't," her voice was tight as wire. "Don't say it if it's not, I can't. If you say it and then someday you." "Etta," he turned so he could see her face, that fierce guarded face that had lied to him on his own porch in the rain 3 weeks ago, because lying was the only wall she'd had left to put between her brother and the world. He waited until her eyes came up to his. And then he said it low, hardly above a breath, the way a man says a thing he means to hold to past his own dying. "You're mine now, both of you, my own, same as if you'd been born to my own house, and there's no undoing it, not by paper, nor coin, nor any living soul. Nobody takes you back, not that woman, not the law, nor a judge, nor the whole territory riding up my road. You hear me? No one takes you now, not ever again, you're home." And Etta broke. Not the way children break, loud and passing. She broke the way a thing breaks that has held under weight too long past bearing all at once and all the way through, folding into his chest with her hands fisted in his bloodied shirt. And she wept, that girl who had carried her brother 3 nights across open country and never once let him see her cry. Caleb held her and held the boy and said nothing more. The word was said, and his word was the one wall in her whole life that had never yet come down, and somewhere in the racking of her sobs he felt her, at long last, begin to believe it. Sam's small hand crept up and found Etta's and held on. A shadow fell warm across them, and Della was there, kneeling on the boards, her own eyes wet, one hand smoothing Sam's hair and one hand hovering, uncertain, at the edge of them as though she did not know if she had the right. Caleb freed a hand from the children and took hers and drew her in, and closed the circle. She came without a word. Her fingers laced through his and held, and that was the whole of what was said between them, and it was enough. It was everything. 4 of them on a way station porch in the risen sun, where a little while ago there had been one man alone in a lamplit house with no one to keep. "Come on," Caleb said when he could. His voice was not steady, and he did not try to make it so. "Let's go home." They rode out into the morning with the marshal's business closing up behind them and the road running gold to the east. Caleb had Sam up in the saddle before him, wrapped now in Caleb's own coat, the boy's dark head tucked under his chin. Etta rode close on the sorrel, near enough her stirrup all but touched his, and she kept looking over at her brother and at Caleb as though to be sure, and each time she seemed to sit a little straighter. Della rode on the other side with the letter safe against her heart. The sun came up full over the wet spring land and warmed their backs, and they rode home together, 4, where there had been 1. Chapter 10, A Real Family. The circuit judge came to town on a Tuesday, and by then there was nothing left of Mrs. Pruitt's claim but the paper it was written on. Caleb Hart sat on a hard bench in the back of the meeting hall with Etta on one side and Sam on the other, and he watched the whole thing come apart the way a rotten fence comes apart, all at once, at the first honest push. The judge was a lean, gray man named Ferris who had ridden 1,000 miles of hard country and had no patience left for men who lied to his face. Marshal Boone stood at the front with the county seat letter in his hand, and he read the dates aloud so the whole room could hear them. "The surrender letter is signed the 9th of October, Boone said. "The mother, Ruth Ann Vesey, was buried the 2nd of September. There's the church record, there's the doctor's word." He looked up, and his old eyes were flat and hard. "A dead woman signed nothing." A sound went through the room like wind through wheat. Caleb felt Etta go rigid beside him, and he laid his big hand over her small one and held it there. Mrs. Pruitt tried. He had to give her that. She tried right up to the end, dabbing at her eyes with a black handkerchief, calling the children ungrateful, calling him a thief of wards. But the investigator from the county seat had come in on the same coach as the judge, and he had the ledgers now, the real ones, the locked book Etta had told Caleb about on the porch a lifetime ago. Columns of children's names, columns of coin. So much a month to the sawmill, so much to the tannery, so much to any man who paid. Judge Ferris read 3 pages of it in a silence so deep Caleb could hear Sam breathing. "Madam," the judge said at last, and he took his spectacles off, "you did not run a home, you ran a market, and the goods were children." He set the ledger down as though it soiled his hands. "This court finds no lawful guardianship ever existed. The Pruitt home is ordered closed. Every child in it is to be accounted for and placed by this county under honest supervision, and you will answer to the territorial court for the rest." He looked at Boone. "Marshal, she's yours." Of Mr. Vane, there was no sign at all. He had ridden out the same dawn Caleb pulled Sam from his wagon at the way station, and he had not looked back, and no one in the country ever saw the good gray coat again. A man who worked only for coin, Caleb figured, had a fine nose for when the coin was about to turn into a rope. Let him run. There were roads enough in the world for a man like that to be small on. They did the second thing 3 weeks later in the same hall, and it was a far better morning. Caleb stood in front of Judge Ferris with his hat in his hands and his good coat brushed and his boots blacked, and he had never in his life been so plainly frightened of a piece of paper. Della stood at his shoulder in a blue dress. Etta and Sam stood before the judge in clothes the storekeeper's wife had sewn and would not take $1 for. "You understand what you're asking," Ferris said, but there was no hardness in it now. "You take them as your own. Your name, your land, your debts, your grave beside them if it comes to that. There's no giving them back when they vex you, Mr. Hart, and children do vex a man." "I know it," Caleb said. "And you want this." Caleb looked down at the two of them. Etta was watching him the way she had watched him that first wet night on the porch, braced, measuring, ready to run. He understood now that she would watch him like that a while longer, that the workhouse had taught her to wait for the floor to drop, and that he would just have to keep standing under her until she believed a floor could hold. He didn't mind. He had all the years in the world for it. "I've wanted it," Caleb said, "since the night they came in out of the rain." "Then say it plain so the court hears you." Caleb cleared his throat. His voice came out lower than he meant. "I want Etta and Sam Vesey to be Etta and Sam Hart. I want them mine and me theirs, and no man living able to say different." Ferris dipped his pen. Marshal Boone stepped up to sign as witness, the same man who had ridden out to the ranch months back to take the children away, and who now put his name down to make them stay. When it was done, the judge blotted the paper and turned it so the children could see the words. "There," he said, "that paper used to be a thing that hunted you. Now read what it says." Sam looked up at Della. Della nodded. And Sam who had not spoken a word for the first 2 days under Caleb's roof, Sam who had hidden behind his sister and coughed in his sleep, put his small finger on the line and read it out loud, slow and sure, in the clear high voice he'd found at the schoolhouse slate. "Sam Hart," he read, then prouder, "That's me." Etta made a sound. She had not cried at the way station, not truly. She had wept the tears of a body wrung dry. But she cried now, standing in a courtroom with her brother's new name in front of her, and Caleb went down on one knee in the aisle and folded her in against his chest and let her. "No one takes you now," he said into her hair, the old words, the whispered vow worn smooth by then from saying. "You hear me, girl? It's on paper and it's in me and it holds both ways. No one takes you now." "I know," Etta said, muffled and fierce and finally believing it. "I know, Pa." It was the first time she called him that. He had to look at the ceiling a while before he trusted his own face. Caleb Hart and Della Coburn were married in the last week of that spring, out under the cottonwood by the creek where the water ran loud and clean. There was no grand doing. The storekeeper came, and his wife, and Marshal Boone in a collar that plainly strangled him, and a scatter of neighbors who had once gone quiet when Vane walked into town and had since found their voices and their shame both. The preacher said the words. Della said hers with her chin up and her eyes wet. Caleb said his in the same low, sure voice he'd used before the judge, because it was the same promise really, only larger. Etta stood up with Della as though she'd been born to it. Sam carried the ring on a bit of ribbon and did not drop it, and afterward announced to everyone within earshot that he had not dropped it. There was a supper on planked tables in the yard, and a fiddle, and Sam danced with the storekeeper's wife standing on the tops of her shoes, and Etta let a boy her own age walk her twice around the fire before she remembered she didn't do such things and sent him off, but she was smiling when she did it. Late, when the lamps burned low and the guests had rattled off down the dark road, Della found Etta out by the corral fence, watching the horses move gray in the moonlight. "You've a mother now if you'll have one," Della said carefully, coming to stand beside her. "I won't crowd you. But I'm here and I mean to stay here, and I wanted you to hear it said." Etta was quiet a while. Then she said, "My mama was good, she just got sick." "I know she was. I never mean to stand where she stood." Della folded her hands on the rail. "I only mean to stand next to it." Etta considered that. It was, Caleb would think later when Della told him of it, exactly the right thing to say to a girl who guarded every door of herself. Etta reached over after a moment and put her hand on top of Della's on the rail, the same small, hard hand Caleb had held in the courtroom. "All right," Etta said, that was all. But from Etta it was everything, and Della had wit enough to know it and did not spoil it by saying more. The seasons turned the way they do. By high summer the ranch was a loud place and a full one. Sam grew an inch and then another, and the cough left him entirely, chased off by good milk and hard sun and nothing left to be afraid of. He named every animal on the place and half the wild birds besides. He read aloud at the supper table each night, from the Bible, from Della's school books, from an old dog-eared novel of pirates that Caleb pretended to disapprove of and listened to every word of. The barn kitten, grown into a rangy yellow tom, slept on the foot of Sam's bed and answered more or less to the name Biscuit. Etta rode the range like she'd been poured into a saddle. She could cut a calf from the herd and doctor a wire cut and out-argue Caleb on the price of feed, and she did all three before breakfast some days. The braced look left her by degrees, the way frost leaves a field. You couldn't say the morning it was gone, only that one day you noticed the green. She stopped sleeping near the door. She stopped keeping her boots on. And once, when a wagon came up the road unexpected at dusk, Caleb watched her glance up from the wash line and then just go back to her work, because a wagon on the road was only a wagon now and never again a thing that hunted her. That was the thing he was proudest of, though he never found the words to tell her, that she had learned to not be afraid. There came a night late in that first year when a spring rain moved in off the hills, the slow, steady kind that soaks the ground and greens the grass, drumming soft on the roof of the house. Caleb stood out on the porch in it a while, in the same spot where two soaked children had once pounded at his door, and he listened to the rain and to the low, warm murmur of the house behind him, Della's voice and Sam's laugh, and Etta saying something dry that made them both laugh harder. Della came out and stood beside him and slid her hand into his. "You'll take a chill," she said. "Just listening." "To what?" He didn't answer right off. He thought about the man he'd been the night they came, a widower in a quiet, orderly, lonely house, mending tack by lamplight with no one in the world to mend it for. He thought about how small his life had been and how he hadn't even known it, the way you don't know a room is cold until someone lights the stove. "To the house," he said finally. "Used to be I could hear the clock from every corner of it, too quiet, I'd near forgot what it was for." Della leaned against his arm. Inside, Sam shrieked with laughter about something, and Biscuit thumped down off a chair, and Etta hollered at both of them without any heat in it at all. "Not quiet anymore," Della said. "No," Caleb smiled into the dark and the rain. "Not anymore." He looked out past the yard, to the road where hoofbeats had once passed in the night and turned a girl white with fear, and there was nothing on it now but rain and the good black dark and the low shapes of his own cattle asleep in his own grass. Everything he had safe under his own roof. Everything he'd nearly lost, kept. He said the words one more time, quiet, more to himself and to God than to anyone. The vow that had started as a thing he hoped and become a thing he'd bled for and ended as a thing that simply was, plain and settled as the ground under the house. "No one takes you now." Then he turned and went inside out of the rain, into the light and the noise and the warmth of it, and shut the door behind him against the night. A man who had once had only his word to give, and had given it, and watched it grow into a family and held.